Hello everyone and welcome to the weird, scary and horrible parts of humanity. Tuong Nguyen was born on the 17th of August 1980 in Song La, Thailand in a refugee camp. Song La is in the Mueang district near the border with Malaysia. His mother Kim was Vietnamese, as was his father. He was one of two sons and had a younger twin brother, Koa. While his father settled down in the United States of America, the rest of the Nguyen family settled down in Melbourne and Victoria, Australia. Prior to migrating to Australia, his mother had planned on adopting out one of her children as she could not afford to look after twins, but decided to keep them and raise them to the best of her ability as a single mother. He initially attended St Ignatius School in Richmond before attending St Joseph's Primary School in Springvale, where the family would settle down. Springvale is 22 kilometres or 14 miles southeast of the centre of Melbourne. When Nguyen was aged 6 in 1987, his mother married a Vietnamese Australian man who often beat the family. His mother would eventually divorce him. His mother worked triple shifts and multiple jobs in order to provide for both boys, who attended Mount Waverley Secondary College, the principal high school in Mount Waverley which borders Springvale. However, throughout high school, his twin brother became an increasingly problematic child, including threatening to drop out of school at the age of 15 as well as becoming a heroin addict, which he managed to recover from. However, Koa continued to be involved in crime, including drug trafficking. After completing his VCE, Nguyen left school and was going to study at Deakin University. According to the QS University World Rankings 2021, Deakin University is ranked as the 16th best university in the country and 271st best university in the world. Notable alumni include journalists and TV presenters Emerald Bagici, Lee Sales and Lavinia Nixon, MP for Port Adelaide Mark Butler, former Premier of Victoria John Brumby, as well as permanent representative of the United Nations to Afghanistan Mahmoud Saidal. However, this never worked out due to financial commitments of a family, even though, unlike in the United States of America, Australia operates under HECS, whereby you can pay for university upfront, or under HECS as a domestic Australian or New Zealand student, your university costs are deducted from your future salary and taxation when your salary hits $55,000, which as of 2018 was deducted to $42,000, with a previous deduction for people who paid for their university up front. So even though Nguyen didn't have to pay for university up front or take out countless bank loans as he would have in the United States of America, he still didn't go to university because of financial reasons and took odd jobs from the age of 18 in 1998, including working as a store clerk and a door-to-door salesman. At the age of 19 in 1999, he took a plunge and started up his own computer business and shop. However, this quickly failed. Following the failure of his computer shop business, he took a sales, research and marketing job where he earned between $1,500 and $2,500 per month, depending on how much commission he received. It is worth noting that in May 2000, Australia's minimum wage was $400.40 per week, so if Nguyen's sales were poor, he was barely making minimum wage. Between June and December 2002, he took 4 months unpaid leave from his job. According to his confession upon his arrest, this was as a result of medication that he was taking for acne, which necessitated 4 months leave. At the time, he had a girlfriend named Amiara. However, his brother continued to cause problems and Nguyen felt a quasi-moral obligation to look after his brother. Koa had begun to pay back debts of between $20,000 and $25,000, which he had in order to repay legal fees which were incurred during defense of his drug trafficking charges, as well as a 1999 attack on a Pacific Islander youth with a katana, a curved Japanese sword. The money was owed back to Nguyen's Australian-Chinese friend Jonathan Lim, with Lim having paid Nguyen and Nguyen in turn having paid Koa's lawyers. Nguyen had tried to help Koa by paying back $12,000 of his debt, which had to be repaid by the end of 2002. However, by the end of 2002, Nguyen was only able to pay $4,000 of the debt. By October 2002, he had been out of work for 4 months and was struggling to survive, which was exacerbated by having to pay off the debt for his troubled brother. His rent in a shared home at 66 Brandon Park Drive, Mulgrave in Melbourne, where he shared a home with 5 friends, as well as his living expenses equated to $580 per month. In November 2002, his father came to see Nguyen Co and his mother, having never had anything to do with his sons or their mother or even met his sons. Nguyen rebuffed his father's offer for financial assistance and refused to see him. However, as 2002 rolled along, Nguyen became desperate and his friends were unable to help him. In the first week of November, he met with a Chinese-Australian man who went under the name Tan in a food court in a shopping centre in Box Hill, a suburb 14 kilometres east of the centre of Melbourne. Having evaluated him for a drug trafficking job, Tan sent Nguyen out of state to Sydney, New South Wales. Put up at the Pacific International Hotel on George Street in Sydney's CBD, which is now the Mantra Central Sydney, he met Vietnamese-Australian Sun at the hotel. Sun offered for Nguyen to smuggle what he referred to as white. Nguyen didn't know if it was cocaine or heroin, but knew it was drugs. The drugs were to be smuggled from Cambodia via Singapore to Melbourne and possibly Sydney. For this, Sun would pay off all of Koa's debts. Returning home to Melbourne, Nguyen flew back to Sydney on the 1st of December 2002 and once again stayed at the Pacific International Hotel. There he was given, by Sun, a business class return ticket to Singapore and a connecting flight to Cambodia. On the 2nd of December 2002, he boarded a Qantas flight from Sydney to Singapore, arriving at between 3:30 and 4 a.m, but was never to return to Australia alive. This was the first time Nguyen had left Australia since arriving there as a baby from Thailand, and he did not inform anyone, friends or family, that he was a drug mule, and merely said that he was in need of a holiday. Entering Singapore, he met a friend, Gologan, a friend he knew who studied in Melbourne. The pair met at the arrivals hall of Terminal 2 Changi Airport, and he spoke for about 2 hours with Golgan before checking in for a connecting Silkair flight to Cambodia with the flight departing from Terminal 2. He did not tell Golgan of the intentions of his trip and noted that he was on a trip around the world. At midday on the 3rd of December 2002, he arrived in Phnom Penh and stayed the night there at the Pacific Hotel. On the 4th of December 2002, he met a man at the Lucky Burger restaurant in Ratana Plaza at 3 p.m. A Vietnamese-speaking man then joined them. Nguyen was taken in a car to a garage and was forced to smoke heroin by the pair. However, after inhaling it 3 to 4 times, he vomited and began to feel sick and was dropped off at the side street of the Pacific Hotel. On the 5th of December 2002, Nguyen once again met the pair at the Lucky Burger restaurant, and the Vietnamese-speaking and Cambodian man took him to the garage where once again they smoked heroin. He fared far better this time after inhaling it 3 times. Forced to take off his shirt, they stuck 2 packets of substance wrapped in tape, placed it on his back and said that they would prepare everything, warning him to stay in Phnom Penh until the 10th of December. While in Phnom Penh, he did some shopping and saw prostitutes. However, he decided to take a YOLO trip to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam to see where his family was from. He left Phnom Penh on the 7th of December, hiring a car, but when he reached the border it was 6 p.m. and too late to cross the border, so he stayed in a casino hotel before crossing the border on the 8th of December at 7 a.m, reaching Ho Chi Minh City at 8 a.m, where he stayed for 2 nights. He returned to Phnom Penh as planned on the 10th of December but missed the scheduled meeting at the Lucky Burger, which was to take place at 4 p.m. He managed to get into contact with the associates who agreed to meet him the next day, on the 11th of December, when they took him to the garage. There they beat him and scolded him for missing their original meeting and accused him of being a police officer. They then instructed him on how to crush heroin blocks using a coffee blender and strap the packages to his body. The heroin totaled 396.2 grams. If all went well, upon arrival in Melbourne, Nguyen was to be told by someone who would recognise him that they liked basketball and would then take him away, cut the heroin off his body and take it to be sold in either Melbourne or Sydney. The syndicate in Cambodia also threatened his family and warned him that they knew where he lived. However, the person who was supposed to help Nguyen strap the heroin to his body had left, and Nguyen spent the rest of the day on the 11th of December in his hotel room, crushing it and packaging the drugs using a hammer and power adapter, strapping it to his body with sticky tape. He divided it into 2 packets, one of 151.5 grams and one of 244.7 grams. One he left strapped to his abdomen and the other to his lower back. There was enough heroin for more than 26,000 doses. On the 12th of December, he checked out of his hotel at 11 AM and took a taxi to the Phnom Penh International Airport, arriving there at 11:45 AM. There, he aimed to get a short-haul Silk Air flight from Phnom Penh to Singapore, flight MI622, which was to depart at 12:20 PM. He was checked twice by security officers in Phnom Penh and the heroin was not discovered. However, on the short flight from Phnom Penh to Singapore, he experienced extreme difficulties, went to the toilet, moved the heroin from his abdomen into his pants, tucked out of his shirt, and at his seat, stuffed it into his backpack. Ironically, had Nguyen been arrested in Cambodia, he would not have faced the death penalty, with Cambodia having abolished capital punishment in 1989. When Chinese-Australian Gordon Vuong was arrested at Phnom Penh International Airport attempting to smuggle 2.1 kilograms of heroin into Australia, on the 22nd of January 2005, he was sentenced to 13 years imprisonment in May 2005. However, at the time, Vuong was aged only 16, and this undoubtedly played into his sentencing. Despite over 66,000 Cambodians living in Australia as of the 2016 census and 127,430 Australians visiting Cambodia in 2018, at the time that this video is being produced in November 2021, there were no direct flights from Cambodia to Australia, with the main options being to fly through neighbouring Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore or Vietnam and get a connecting flight back to Australia. Hence, Nguyen was going through Singapore in order to get back to Australia. Nguyen was transferred onto connecting flight Qantas Flight QF10, a Qantas Boeing 747-400, which was arriving from London Heathrow and transferring in Singapore on its way back to Melbourne. While Qantas still flies to Singapore from Melbourne, it utilises the smaller A330 and now routes its London to Melbourne QF10 flight through Perth, Western Australia. However, until at least April 2022, due to COVID-19 and the closure of the Western Australia border, the flight is operated through Darwin in the Northern Territory on board a Boeing 787. Nguyen spent 4.5 hours transiting at Singapore's Changi airport, having arrived from Cambodia at 3:20 PM, transferring from Terminal 2 to Terminal 1. From where Qantas departs, he bought a carton of Marlboro Menthol Light cigarettes, smoked it in the smoking room, and purchased a $10 international calling card, calling his girlfriend Amiaga from a phone in the Qantas business class lounge. He took a shower while in the lounge and threw the tapes on the heroin in his backpack into the rubbish bin. Falling asleep, he awoke at 7:30 PM, believing that his flight to Melbourne was to depart at 7:40 PM. He ran as fast as he could to gate C22, a distance of approximately 5 minutes. However, he got the times for his flight back to Melbourne muddled up, and when he arrived at gate C22 at 7:45 PM, his flight was only boarding. Going through security, the alarms went off and he realised that he had left his mobile phone in his pocket. Asked by a female police officer to check his body despite taking his phone out, Nguyen pulled his arms out as the officer checked his body, and he must have known that he was done for. The police officer checked his body with a wand, which did not go off, before patting him down and searching him by hand. The officer felt something bulky on his lower back, and when she asked what it was, Nguyen simply replied no. Taking his backpack and business bag with him, he was taken to a search room. Upon arriving in the search room, he removed his jacket and shirt with a plastic packet seen on his lower back with masking tape. Nguyen began crying and tried to hit his head against a wall before holding his head in his hands. Sergeant Phi Kim Leng, the officer in charge, went to see Nguyen, who asked what was on his back, and he said it was heroin. Nguyen then showed the 151.5 grams of heroin in his straw bag. His bags were taken off the Qantas flight and he was kept by the Central Narcotics Bureau, who arrived at the Singapore Changi airport at 9:10 PM. Nguyen was then taken to the infamous Changi prison. He remained cooperative, including providing the phone numbers of the organisers in Sydney, but stressed his fear that he could be killed or injured if he chickened out of smuggling the heroin. Nguyen confessed to having 369.2 grams of heroin, which was more than 26 times the amount of heroin that mandates the death penalty in Singapore, which is applied under the Misuse of Drugs Act for the importation or exportation of more than 15 grams of heroin. The fact that Nguyen was merely in transit from Cambodia to Australia did not make a difference. On the 20th of March 2004, the Singaporean High Court found him guilty of drug smuggling and sentenced him to death in accordance with Singaporean law, resulting in his transfer to death row. Even though the odds were against him, as at the time no person had been saved from the gallows in Singapore for drug-related crimes, in a letter to loved ones, he said that he had found the true meaning of life on death row. Indeed, the senior lawyer for Nguyen, Lee Lasry, said that he was a reformed man and rehabilitated. Throughout his sentence, he was primarily supported by Amiara, Kelly Ng, who he met in Year 10 at Mount Waverley Secondary College, and Bronwyn Liu, who he also met at school, as well as his mother, also noting that he had found God while on death row. While he had lost contact with Ng and Liu as he began to hang out with a different crowd after high school, both were shocked when they heard of his arrest and came back into contact with him in 2002 following his arrest. An appeal to the Court of Appeal in Singapore was rejected on the 20th of October 2004, and an appeal to the Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong was also rejected. Now, it is worth noting that despite Nguyen being an Australian citizen, pleas for clemency by the Liberal Howard government were lackadaisical at best. I mean, forget the idea of Labour Prime Minister Bob Hawke calling the hangings of Kevin Barlow and Brian Chambers barbaric in 1986. While there was public anger and frustration, especially in the months and weeks before his pending execution, no one really gave Nguyen the time of day up until late 2005, when the chances of him being executed seemed very realistic. At the time, there was another Australian who was potentially facing the death penalty for allegedly smuggling weed in October 2004 into Bali, Indonesia. On the 27th of May 2005, Chappelle Corby was sentenced to 20 years in prison in Bali, Indonesia. Chappelle Corby's case caused unprecedented media attention in Australia, and in the words of Channel 9 journalist Mike Munro, caused the highest debate and divided the country more than any criminal case since the Azaria Chamberlain case. In the case of Azaria Chamberlain in 1980, 9-week-old baby Azaria Chamberlain was killed by a dingo in Uluru, with her mother Lindy Chamberlain convicted of the murder in 1982 and sentenced to life in jail before being released on the 7th of February 1986, when it was found that a dingo had in fact killed her baby, with the dingo having grabbed the baby while they were sleeping in a tent near Uluru. However, for Nguyen, well, there wasn't as much media interest. His family and friends started a bottom-up campaign with the tracing of hands, having traced his hand over a glass wall while he was on death row as part of a reach-out campaign. Amnesty International managed to get 100 parliamentarians and 300 parliamentary staff to sign the petition, which was presented to Singapore's High Commissioner to Australia, Joseph Koh. Within the media, however, there wasn't much interest until the weeks before his execution. Unlike with Corby, there was no interview on Channel 9's 60 Minutes, A Current Affair or Sunday of either Nguyen or his family, and unlike Barlow and Chambers, there was never a bidding war between the major Australian television networks Channel 7 and Channel 9 for exclusive rights to interview the family. For Nguyen, there was never this prolific interest, and his family was never interviewed, nor did any media network approach him or his family for an interview during his plight on death row. The only piece of media interest was a press conference given by his mother, who spoke minimal English. One of the main reasons was obviously that Nguyen was guilty beyond reason, with Nguyen even admitting himself that he was guilty. Whereas with Barlow and Chambers, there was a belief that one was innocent and had been set up by the other. And for Corby, at least in 2005, there was still a huge belief that she was innocent. Personally, I can remember listening to AM talk stations, 2GB and 2UE in Sydney at the time, and you couldn't go a couple of days without a presenter or caller talking about Corby and assuming her innocence. However, for Nguyen, yes, people were talking about it, and were against his execution and were sympathetic to a degree. However, as there was no doubting his guilt, there was a question of why the bloody hell did he do it. Personally, I remember then 2GB Drive Time presenter Philip Clark asking why he didn't get more shifts as a market researcher or talk with his boss about his financial difficulties to see if they could increase his salary. But another reason for the lack of media attention was that he was an Asian Australian. Now yes, Michelle Leslie was an Asian Australian, but she was female eye candy to the media as a model and former runner-up for Miss World Australia. However, she was only caught with 2 ecstasy tablets in Bali, Indonesia, which were for personal use, and she wasn't really in the same category as a heroin drug trafficker. Leslie was interviewed from her prison cell by 7 News and 60 Minutes on Channel 9 in Australia upon her release. By contrast, Corby, Barlow and Chambers were all white Australians, as the Sydney Morning Herald put it following the execution in Indonesia in 2015 of Australian Asian drug smugglers Mayuran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan. If you're caught overseas smuggling drugs, don't be male, don't be Asian and don't be ugly. By the way, we did a video on the execution of Barlow and Chambers, so please go ahead and check that video out. On the 21st of October 2005, the Australian government made a plea for the Singaporean government to save Nguyen's life, but this fell on deaf ears. Other governments, including New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark, despite Nguyen not being a New Zealand citizen, as well as the then Pope Benedict XVI, and the government of the Holy See, attempted to intervene and call for leniency, but to no avail. Australia's Foreign Minister Alexander Downer met with the Singaporean Foreign Minister in Perth, Western Australia, Vivian Balakrishnan, and asked for clemency, but none was given. The Australian Governor-General Michael Jeffrey also appealed, but once again this had no impact. Coincidentally, on the 7th of November 2005, human rights activists held a vigil for Nguyen with opposition politician Chee Soon Juan, the second Secretary-General of the Singapore Democratic Party, present at the vigil. On the 17th of November 2005, Nguyen's mother was delivered a letter stating that her son would be hanged on the morning of the 2nd of December 2005. On the same day, while at the APEC summit in South Korea, Australia's Prime Minister John Howard met with Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, and during the meeting pleaded for Nguyen's life. However, unbeknownst to Prime Minister Howard, Nguyen's mother had already received the notice of her son's execution, which deeply angered Howard as he had not been informed beforehand. Indeed, Prime Minister Howard stated, "We have done all we can, despite pleas of the government to do more." Nguyen's lawyers flew out to Singapore, arriving on the 18th of November 2005 to inform Nguyen of his execution date. On the 21st of November 2005, the lawyers of Nguyen requested a hearing at the International Court of Justice. However, this was denied by Foreign Minister Downer, as it was unlikely that Singapore was going to agree. On the 24th of November 2005, the Victorian Attorney General Robert Hulls met with Singapore's Senior Minister of State for Law and Home Affairs Ho Peng Ki to press for clemency, but this was unsuccessful. Nguyen's mother wrote a letter to Queen Elizabeth II hoping that she could assist in saving Nguyen's life, with both Australia and Singapore members of the Commonwealth of Nations, but this came to no avail as Queen Elizabeth II did not intervene. The then opposition MP Tony Burke expressed his frustration in an interview with the Sydney Morning Herald in 2013 that he could not have pressured the Howard government to do more, and stated that it was his greatest personal tragedy while in opposition. In the midst of this political upheaval, Koa flew with his mother on board Qantas flight QF9, a Qantas Boeing 747-400 to Singapore on the 21st of November to see his brother for the first time in 3 years. It wasn't that he couldn't afford the trip to Singapore, it was just that he didn't care and didn't want to see his brother. Upon seeing his brother, he later told Victorian Attorney General Robert Hulls that he would turn his life around. Singapore's contract hangman Darshan Singh gave an interview to the newspaper The Daily Telegraph, telling the newspaper that he hoped that he would be called up to perform the execution based on his experience as an executioner, and believed that he would execute Nguyen efficiently. As a result, a new executioner, who was unnamed, was given the job. 2 days before his execution, a survey by Roy Morgan Association revealed that 52% of Australians supported the execution of Nguyen, 44% were against it, and the remaining 4% were uncertain. On the 1st of December, a lawyer in Melbourne launched a last-ditch legal tactic, charging Nguyen with drug-related offences in the Melbourne Magistrates Court, hoping that it meant that Nguyen could be extradited by the Australian federal government. However, Justice Minister Christopher Ellison ruled this out, as the Commonwealth Director of Public Prosecutions would not be able to prosecute Nguyen due to double jeopardy laws. On the same day, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong informed the media that the execution of Nguyen would go ahead, despite the Australian press labelling the execution as barbaric. The night before his execution, Nguyen was confronted by Father Gregory Van Gaiang. The pair read the Bible and recited the 23rd Psalm. Nguyen wrote, "I smile now as I prepare myself to return to the Lord. These shall be my last words now, but I will see you again. Be of great faith, of great courage and firm heart. Fear not, my brothers and sisters, fear not." A request was made for Nguyen to be able to hug his mother before the execution, but this was denied by the Singaporean government, and instead he was able to put his fingers through a hole to touch his mother and brother, with their bodies separated by glass. His last words to them were, "See you later." According to his friends in an interview in 2013 with the Sydney Morning Herald, he genuinely believed that he would see them all in the afterlife. At 5:15 a.m, Koa left the prison dressed in white and headed for a taxi, followed by the rest of his family and supporters Kelly Ng, Bronwyn Luo, and 3 former school friends, who all headed for the prison's reception area. His fellow death row inmates sang and recited hymns as he was taken to the gallows at around 6 a.m, with his final words to guards before being led to the gallows being "Bu chant bu," translating from a Chinese dialect into English as "Do I stand a chance?" During this time, his mother was in the prison chapel praying. Taken to the gallows, he was hanged at 6:06 a.m. Singaporean time, and at 7:17 a.m. the Ministry of Home Affairs stated in a short statement, "The sentence was carried out this morning at Changi prison. It was witnessed by a doctor and prison officers." A large amount of Australian media, as well as supporters, gathered outside the prison throughout the night. Supporters held a candle-lit vigil, with 2 new candles brought every hour. At 10:20 a.m, Nguyen's body was taken in a casket FairPrice funerals van to Sing Min, with his body taken at 2 p.m. from a funeral parlour to the Marymount Convent for a private funeral. His body was returned to Australia on the 3rd of December 2005, and on the 7th of December his funeral took place in Melbourne St Patrick's Cathedral, which was held in English and Vietnamese. Labour MPs Jeff Hilton, Bruce Maidenhall, Sam Nguyen and Richard Wine attended the service, but this was criticised by the Crime Victim Support Association, as it appeared that they were showing support for a convicted drug trafficker. Nguyen is buried at St Patrick's Cathedral in East Melbourne. Vigils took place on the day of Nguyen's execution throughout Australia, as the Australian government was criticised for its inaction. Airport workers allegedly refused to process Singapore Airlines luggage. However, the Howard government refused to take out any action against Singapore following Nguyen's execution. In Singapore, the execution of Nguyen barely made a ripple in the local media and was barely covered. Speaker of the Parliament of Singapore, Abdullah Tarmugi, who was part of the People's Action Party, wrote a letter to the Speaker of the Australian House of Representatives, David Hawker, noting he was caught in possession of almost 400 grams of pure heroin, enough for more than 26,000 doses of heroin for drug addicts. He knew what he was doing and the consequences of his actions. As representatives of the people, we have an obligation to protect the lives of those who could be ruined by the drugs he was carrying. We cannot allow Singapore to be used as a transit for illicit drugs into the region. Additionally, the then Singaporean High Commissioner in Australia, Joseph Koh, wrote an opinion piece in the Sydney Morning Herald, stating Singapore cannot afford to pull back from its tough drug trafficking position. Just over a year after Nguyen's execution on the 7th of December 2006, the national broadcaster of Australia, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, the ABC, broadcast the documentary Just Punishment, which followed attempts to save Nguyen's life by his family and supporters, with the documentary filmed between 2003 and 2005. It was rebroadcast on the 8th of December 2008. In 2013, the Special Broadcasting Services, SBS, broadcast the 4-episode miniseries Better Man, which tells the story of Nguyen, albeit mostly factual. A large part of the dialogue and scenes are created for dramatic purposes. While the series was criticised by the family as it reopened old wounds and his mother declined to contribute to the project, it did gain excellent reviews. If you have a chance to check it out, it really is worth it. Prior to the execution of Bali 9 drug traffickers Myuran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan in 2015, Nguyen's mother spoke to Women's Weekly and stated how much she and Koa had been suffering since her son's execution, noting that they cry and hug each other to sleep most nights. By the way, we will be doing a future video on the execution of Myuran Sukumaran and Andrew Chan, as well as the Bali 9, so please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to be informed of when that video comes out. Sun, Tan, the people in Cambodia, and whoever else organised Nguyen's ill-fated drug run back into Australia were never found. Thank you for watching. Please do yourself a favour and hit that subscribe button and the bell icon to inform you when new videos come out. Also, why not hit that like button and leave a nice comment? It helps more than you know and your support is truly appreciated. Until next time, stay awesome, stay classy, be kind to everyone you meet, and have an amazing day.